So, a lot of people this holiday season watched some version of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. I myself have seen pretty much all the major versions, and you have the Muppet Christmas Carol, and these days everybody points to that as their favorite. Some rumor out there suggests that it's the most faithful adaptation of Dickens' A Christmas Carol, and that's a lie. It's fun, it's cute. Always a big fan of Michael Caine. He's great in it. Um, but whoever is telling you it's the most faithful adaptation is lying. I think they're just saying that so that you go, ooh, really? Wow, the Muppet version is the most faithful. Isn't that interesting? It'd be interesting if it was true, but it's not true. I mean, you got Muppets. You have a bunch of jokes that aren't in the original text. They've dumbed down the dialogue, understandably, for not just the kids, but for many of us adults. And they changed the ending. Don't tell me it's the most faithful adaptation. That's just simply untrue. You have the Patrick Stewart version. The less I talk about the Patrick Stewart version, the better. I think, look, I get it. Star Trek fans and X-Men fans are going to swear by this version because it's Patrick Stewart. I like Patrick Stewart. It's an awful performance. It's an awful performance. I'm sorry. It pains me to say that. I don't know what he's doing. I feel like he was overthinking the whole time he portrayed Scrooge. There's the 1951 version with Alastair Sim. Many believe that's the greatest of all time. And if you're telling me that Alastair Sim himself is the best Scrooge of all time, you're not going to get much of a disagreement from me. He's that good. I mean, even I'm willing to admit he's great from start to finish. My problem with the 1951 version is a few things. I don't really like much of the script and how they telegraph a lot of manipulative moments, which bother me a little bit. I won't go into detail on that. But the other thing is they spend way too much time in Scrooge's past. It's like they took their cue from It's a Wonderful Life, which spent an awful lot of time in George Bailey's past before, the big resolution at the end. Well, the Alastair Sim version, the past it has 2 deathbed scenes, it has several business transactions, and lots of things that just aren't very interesting. And it's all to show how mean Scrooge was, and it's completely unnecessary, and it's a complete imbalance for the film. My favorite version of A Christmas Carol is 1984's version with George C. Scott. It's true, it was a television production, or at least a television movie here in America, but the director, Clive Donner, actually filmed it as a cinematic feature. In fact, it played in cinemas in England at around the same time that it played on television here in America. So there's no fade outs and fade ins for commercial breaks, and the transitions are really seamless. In fact, really well done. But there's a multitude of reasons why I love this version, the George C. Scott version. Again, you can argue who the best Scrooge is, probably Alastair Sim, but George C. Scott gives one of the more realistic portrayals. His portrayal of Scrooge is much more grounded than Alastair Sim's version. And by that I mean he really comes across as a real businessman, and of course George C. Scott was always known for his naturalistic performances, kind of in the same vein as Gene Hackman in that regard, where everything that he says seems to be coming from him. And his facial reactions, all very natural. Like, it's the opposite of what we see from Patrick Stewart, to be brutally honest. And so he creates a very realistic Scrooge, which makes his transition from mean to joyous and generous all the more believable. And if you believe the transformation, then it's going to be much more heartwarming, much more enjoyable. However you want to argue who the best Scrooge is, I feel like you can't argue who the best cast is. The best all-around cast, and especially the best ghosts, belong to the 1984 version. Let's just start with Jacob Marley, played by Frank Finlay. He's got these massive chains on him, which he does in every version, but in these cases it's even larger chains, and cash boxes, and he's wearing, of course, a suit that's painted sort of gray. He's got gray makeup on, yellow teeth, and his eyes never blink. They're wide open, and I think he even has gray contacts. And Frank Finlay, the anguish he projects as Marley, the pain that he conveys, is incredible. It really separates him from all the other versions. And I suspect some of the other versions don't really have the two actors on the stage together or on the set together. This one, they clearly are on the set together, and it shows in their interaction. It's really good chemistry between the two of them. And The Ghost of Christmas Past is fine. I got no issues with The Ghost of Christmas Past. There's probably, if you want to say the Muppet version, or say maybe the Robert Zemeckis version is a little bit better, I'll give you that. But The Ghost of Christmas Present is played by Edward Woodward, who used to play the Equalizer, Robert McCall, in the old 1980s television show. The character whom Denzel Washington plays in the movie version. In all the other versions of A Christmas Carol, The Ghost of Christmas Present is a very joyous, sort of large fellow with a beard, and he basically is Father Christmas, right? I mean, that's what he reminds you of. He's laughing, and he's very good-natured. But he's also required to scold Ebenezer Scrooge once or twice, right? So that means he has to throw Scrooge's own words back at him when he says things like, "But if he is to die, then let him die and decrease the surplus population." And so out of nowhere, this really good-natured guy, this Father Christmas type guy, becomes sarcastic, and it just doesn't fit the character. It never fits the character. That's always bothered me with every version, except the 1984 version. The way Edward Woodward plays The Ghost of Christmas Present, sure, he's laughing and he's kind of jolly, but he's also very stern from the very beginning with Scrooge. So by the time he scolds Scrooge and throws Scrooge's own words back in his face, it fits. It totally fits his character. And for the first time ever, you actually sit back and think, oh, this must be what Charles Dickens had in mind when he created The Ghost of Christmas Present. And then that leads me, of course, to The Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come. Always creepy. In every version, he's always creepy. Never creepier than he is in the 1984 version. Supposedly there's an actor in there, but it looks more like a creature. Tall, lanky, obviously dressed like the Grim Reaper, long, spindly fingers, never says a word, but makes these sounds. These really creepy sounds. Like, only thing I can describe it is like a rusty old gate opening and closing. That sort of squeaky noise that you hear. So Oh, and he floats, right? He floats in it on air. So, and a lot of great use of shadow and silhouettes. It's a really creepy version. And speaking of creepy, the atmosphere of the film is great. You've got the cinematography and the music. Really, they knew how to do movies back in those days. And nothing feels like a set because it's on location in this old-timey town called Shrewsbury, England, and so all the costumes, all the buildings, the interiors all look authentic. And oh, I wanted to mention Tiny Tim. In the other versions of Tiny Tim, especially Patrick Stewart and the 1951 version, Tiny Tim, he's like a teenager. Like, what makes him tiny? I don't know. Somebody please explain this to me. Why did they call him Tiny Tim? Because he's a teenager who's as tall as his mother, right? And or almost as tall as his mother. When the time comes for him to sit on sit on his father's shoulder, Bob Cratchit, it looks ridiculous. Like his long legs are like dangling off the shoulder. It makes no sense. And he doesn't really look sick in any of these versions. He just looks like he's got a busted knee or something, and like he's just hobbling on a crutch, and that's it. In the 1984 version, Tiny Tim is actually tiny and very, very young. Little blonde kid, adorable, but he's not only got the crutch, he's very pale, and he's got like dark rings around his eyes, and yeah, it makes you think maybe he is sick. There's something else going on besides the fact that he needs a crutch. Um, and like I say, he's an endearing young actor playing the role, so that definitely helps, given the story of the film. And then finally, as far as acting goes, I got to mention also David Warner, because David Warner has always been known for playing all these villains. I mean, he's been typecast over his many years as a villain, because I mean, movies like Time After Time, where he played Jack the Ripper, and he was so good in that. Well, he plays Bob Cratchit in this, and you know what? He's the most heartwarming, gentle, kind, and heartbreaking Bob Cratchit you'll see. It's funny how casting against type can sometimes be even more effective. So they're all terrific. This is uniformly the best cast you're going to find in any version of A Christmas Carol. And I got to mention the pacing of the film. I told you before, in my opinion, the 1951 version spends way too much time in the past. The good news, most versions actually spend the right amount of time in the past, present, and future, and this is no exception. The director of this movie, Clive Donner, was the editor of the 1951 version, which is crazy to me. But he's been around a long time. But he edited that, so it's like he said, you know what? As good as the 1951 version is, and I should know because I edited it, it could be even better. The pacing could be even better. And he directed this 1984 version, and it's perfect. It is absolutely perfect. This movie, the 84 version, it hits all the right notes with the creepiness, with the fun parts. It's actually quite funny at times. This version also allows Scrooge to have more conversations with the ghosts. And by having those conversations, we get to see the subtle transformations take place. And we get to see great interaction and just great actors working together. Especially when he's working with, Frank Finlay or Edward Woodward, these other fine actors. So I feel like, given the atmosphere, given the authenticity, given the great screenplay, it's so well written that you don't know where Charles Dickens stopped and the screenwriters took over. Really beautiful dialogue, and It's fun, and yet it's also at times heartbreaking and then joyous. It's everything you want in A Christmas Carol. It is a full-bodied adaptation of the Dickens story. I would recommend the 1951 version, if only to see the Alastair Sim performance, because it is something to behold. And like I say, it might well be the best performance by an actor playing Dickens. But even more so, I recommend watching the 1984 version. You're not just going to get what I believe is the best adaptation overall of A Christmas Carol, because of the story, because of the overall acting, because of the atmosphere, because of the authenticity. But you're going to be watching a fine film, really, for any season.